Oh! Guys! I don't think we can beat him!
Gee, Sonic. What gave you that idea?
Probably the mild concussion! You know what? Not the point right now. Tails! Where did we go wrong?
Well, Sonic, if I can make an educated guess, probably hiring Arzest to make our game.
Oh yeah!
I told you we shouldn't have gotten rid of the Mania team.
God, it's game over, isn't it?
I wouldn't say it's over yet, Sonic. But I would say...
We're playing my game now! For the past several months, I've constantly argued with my friends about what soul means for a video game. These discussions have ranged from the jokingly sarcastic to honest debates on what it means for a game to feel alive. Art style, music, level design, etc. all require the right amount of care to bring out the best in a game. If you don't succeed, your game will lack character, purpose. That is what having a soul means, ultimately. To have substance, a reason to exist in the first place, something of inherent value. There are many games, I would argue, that have a vast soul. Whether it be trekking through the Mojave Wasteland in New Vegas, trying to manage terrible monsters in the Lobotomy Corporation, or even reading through the rather questionable scenes of Tsukihime. Inherently, there is something of value to be found. I play games to experience a vision, to see the fruits of the creative process, and to enjoy their merit. Some of my favorite games, like AM2R, show the love and care put into something like a fan remake, with incredible attention to detail down to things like replicating Super Metroid's wall jump to nearly a T. In response to that, I have tried my best to master the mechanics the game has taught me so that I can play it more optimally to enjoy the game at a higher level. Fundamentally, we come to games to enjoy the creative expression of both the game creators and ourselves playing the games in our own unique way. A game without a soul, however, lacks this creative expression. When there is something that has no love or care put into it, when it becomes obvious that a game is completely hollow in its creative process, we lose interest in trying to enjoy it. So, what does a game without a soul look like? I have a few examples, like the Klonoa Phantasy Reverie series, a collection that drains out all of the aesthetical and emotional appeal of the original games, all for the sake of turning a quick buck off of desperate fans. There are also games like the Capcom Cash Grabs, games made without the consent or inclusion of the people who originally envisioned their predecessors, resulting in downright awful games that lack any sort of entertainment value. Not to mention something like Yandere Simulator, which outside of all the terrible, terrible circumstances surrounding its development, can't even be installed on my computer without issues. My computer that can play Elden Ring with no issues. But I think the pinnacle example of a soulless game was made only a month ago. A game so lacking in inspiration, the desire to progress its franchise forward, that it comes off as nothing more than infantile regression. Enter Sonic Superstars. While the game certainly has the physics and feel of a classic Sonic game, when you start peeling back its outer shell, you come to realize that it contains a disgusting underbelly of mediocrity, incomparable to anything else in the series. Sure, you can roll down slopes, feel the facade of speed, but eventually, the game does everything in its power to break even that illusion. That is because Sonic Superstars isn't interested in trying to push the series forward. Quite the contrary. It desires to languish in the most bare-bones, gimmicky nonsense Sonic the Hedgehog has ever conceived. Now, you're probably wondering what I mean by that, and I can't say that I blame you. Sonic is very familiar with level gimmicks, from Sonic 1 to Mania. They've pervaded nearly every game in this franchise, both 2D and 3D. The difference ultimately comes down to how they're implemented. And it's in this way that Superstars fails to understand what makes them work. While gimmicks in the other games either served as a way to boost speed or slow you down enough to build up to the next big release, like a sort of intermission, Superstars gimmicks consistently only exist to keep you at a snail's pace and incite irritation. From Speed Jungle Zone onward, each level either has one specific gimmick or a combination of them that just serves to ruin the pace of the level. Speed Jungle at first doesn't seem like such a drag with these vines that act like grind rails, a la Frog Forest and Lost Jungle from Sonic Heroes. And the tunnel gimmick from Stardust Speedway and CD. The second zone, however, introduces the butterfly gimmick, which blacks out 90% of the screen and makes trying to speed through the level really unpleasant. It just bogs down the pace so much. Then, the following zone, Sky Temple Zone, introduces fans that push you upward, crumbling platforms that get longer when you stand on them and shrink when you're not, jumping on platforms in a tornado, and fucking Breakout for the Atari. As you can tell from that sentence, it's quite a lot of things to have introduced all at once. And that's what this game's MO is in that regard. Not creating interesting level design with the gimmicks serving as short breaks between the large bursts of speed, but just shoving in as many gimmicks into any level as possible. It just makes me ask questions like, why does Pinball Carnival Zone Act 2 have these fire gimmicks that don't feel thematically relevant for what the stage is going for? Or, who thought the constant bouncing in Press Factory Act 1 was fun and totally not an obnoxious mechanic that screeches your movement to a halt? The real hair-ripping one comes from Cyberstation Zone. And the goddamn mouse puzzles. Who the fuck asked for this? What the fuck does this have to do with Sonic design? You have completely changed the gameplay style to something completely unrecognizable, and it is awful. And despite all of this, the gimmicks aren't even the worst part of the game. No, the worst part of this game comes down to the bosses. The first major boss fight of the game is the first key sign of the game's single desire: wasting your time. You see, in any other classic Sonic game up to this point, boss fights usually take seconds to deal with, especially the starting boss. This is because in all of those prior games, you would be able to chain hits on the bosses, allowing for a quick victory before the fight would become stale and unpleasant. The truth of the matter is that most classic Sonic boss fights aren't particularly engaging, but being able to finish them within a short time frame made them excusable and sometimes entertaining if the boss was above average. This is not the case in Superstars. The first thing you'll notice here is that while I try to chain hits, it is physically impossible to do so. The game actively decides that you are going to take your time with this boss, and that you are going to wait until it can be hit again. This type of mentality is the opposite of how Sonic is designed in the first place. Sonic games are centered around being quick at reaction time, and learning how to get faster. The system Superstars uses is more akin to a turn-based RPG. What this results in is an extremely sluggish fight, where you spend an unreasonable amount of time waiting to be able to even hit the boss again. This is how every boss fight in this game operates. By the end game, it is further exacerbated, where you have to wait literal minutes to even be able to hit them once. But we'll get back to that later. For now, let's talk about how this game is one of the most visually stale and artistically bankrupt titles in the entire franchise. Outside of the fact that this game borrows many previously used level themes, resulting in Pitchless Green Hill, Pitchless Chemical Plant, Pitchless Death Egg, etc., the levels themselves all lack in real visual identity. A lot of these stages have incredibly ugly texturing and backgrounds, and don't pop out like the other titles, especially Mania. Sky Temple Zone is quite possibly the ugliest Sonic level I've ever seen, with some of the worst art decisions from this franchise to date. The generic circle patterns on the platforms and background blocks with a muddy beige palette feel like they don't belong in any game, much less a Sonic one. Nothing about these designs conveys anything of a Sky Temple anyway, an aesthetic we've already seen before in the likes of Sky Sanctuary, which captured the idea incredibly well with an iconic design to boot. Other stages like Lagoon City and Sand Sanctuary all feel incredibly lacking in their visual distinction. If I squinted my eyes, I don't think I'd be able to tell the difference between the latter zone and a new Super Mario Bros. Level. Even compared to Sandopolis, easily one of the weakest levels of classic Sonic, the lack of visual identity kills all interest in the zone. If the level doesn't feel visually appealing, it doesn't inspire any interest in me to want to genuinely engage with it or its mechanics. In all fairness, I am not a fan of 2.5D game styles. A majority of the time, it results in games that look bland compared to pixel art-based games. However, it isn't impossible for a 2.5D game to have a distinguishable art style that elevates the experience. Games like Sonic Generations are proof of that. Superstars just doesn't manage to reach that level of excellence, and it hits even harder as the follow-up to Mania, which was an artistic delight. I mean, look at the expression Sonic has here. The way he shakes himself after he gets a droplet on him in Chemical Plant. It makes him feel alive, gives him a bit of characterization without even needing dialogue or anything like that. Compare that to Superstars, which has character animation that feels so stilted that it wouldn't be unreasonable to compare it to something like Pokemon Sword and Shield. And sure, while I find the game to be ugly, there's obviously no Sonic 4 with its plastic grass shit. Even so, to come from Sonic Mania to something that looks like this is a major downgrade no matter which way you slice it. Of course, the music is mostly mediocre too, an unfortunate result of bringing Jun Sano back to make these terrible compositions. Look, the man has talent, but him constantly trying to emulate the Genesis sound just doesn't work. Even when he isn't the composer, a lot of these tracks are either lackluster or downright forgettable, minus the opening theme of Pinball Carnival Act 1, which is a banger. Also, at points it feels blatantly obvious that some of these tracks are desperately trying to riff off of earlier material. Compare this track from Golden Capital Zone Act 1 to Sky Sanctuary and you'll see what I mean. Even though I find the soundtrack to be rather disappointing, I do think some of the highlights come from the Emerald Powers. Aside from the relatively decent music themes that each of the Emerald Powers have, the concept has a lot of merit. Throughout other Sonic games, collecting the Emeralds never really meant much until you had all 7 and could go Super. Then, the 3D games introduced the concept of Chaos Control, which, while cool, was more of a Deus Ex Machina story element than anything of real relevance gameplay-wise. The only game to actively utilize the Chaos Emeralds individually as part of its gameplay was actually Tails Adventure for the Game Gear. And in that game, they basically served as little more than a permanent health and flight meter upgrade. Superstars makes it so that each emerald has an individual ability that gives some of them a good bit of utility. Emphasis on some of them. Powers like Avatar, Bullet, and Slow all have various uses in regards to either level traversal or easing up boss fights. Avatar effectively functions as a screen nuke, where a bunch of copies of the character will crisscross the screen en masse, damaging any enemies and collecting rings and items simultaneously. This ability is basically what makes bosses, at least early on, more bearable. By endgame though, it kind of functionally loses its utility in that regard, as bosses spend more time in the background, unable to be damaged at all. Bullet is the single best ability in the game, basically giving you a semi-homing attack that not only damages enemies, but functionally gives you an unlimited jump for the duration that it's active. Want to not deal with a particularly annoying section of the stage? Use Bullet and just soar over all of your problems. And, since it works to damage enemies, it's helpful in boss fights by allowing you to easily bob and weave attacks and set yourself up for a straight shot. Slow is self-explanatory. It slows down time, allowing for easier platforming during the more difficult sections, and gives you more time to react to boss attacks. While these three powers are incredibly useful, the rest are typically situational at best and functionally useless at worst. What is the purpose of the vision power when the game doesn't blatantly tell you to use it? Fucking nothing. Absolutely nothing. What about the water ability, which turns you into water and makes swimming much faster? Well, given that there are only 2 stages with water in them in the entire game, I'll let you put 2 and 2 together there. The Ivy power, I call it the beanstalk personally, can be kind of useful, basically building a giant stalk for you to climb up, and it does damage any enemy it touches, but it also has a height limit, and it can't grow on certain floors. It would be more useful if, A, I didn't primarily play as Tails, which isn't going to happen because Tails is my favorite Sonic character, and B, if Bullet didn't already exist and do all of these functions with literally none of the limitations. The extra power is also kind of situational. Honestly, I didn't bother using it much, but I hear it has different effects based on the character. Tails gets a little tornado tail whip attack, which, while kinda cool, isn't really as useful as just using Bullet or Avatar. To top it off though, the thing that makes these powers even more situational is that if you get hit even once while using them, you lose the powers immediately until you either die or reach your next checkpoint. So it becomes a why risk it, since why use the powers at all when most of them are already situational to start? Oh well, at least we got super forms back, which, wow, it's kinda disappointing only 2 of these characters even look unique when they have their super form. Tails, Knuckles, and Amy just flash white and have a slight glow to them, but no other visual changes. I'm just like, could there not be any visual alterations made to them at all? Especially in Amy's case because she's a hedgehog. Like Sonic. Literally every other hedgehog in this series gets a visually distinct super transformation. So why not Amy? At least another positive is that you can turn the super forms off at will, which is really helpful if you want to use them in boss fights because boss cutscenes turn them off automatically. Ain't that some shit? At least being able to do this makes it so that you can stop the transformation to collect more rings or use one of the other emerald powers if you feel like doing so, since you can't do those while being super. Of course, it'd be remiss of me to not mention the way of acquiring the Chaos Emeralds. We're still using the hidden big rings of Sonic 3 and Knuckles, though the rings are far easier to locate, even having a distinguishable noise when one is nearby. I have no issues in regards to that. The game clearly wants you to use the abilities, since it keeps telling you which ability to use and when. Kind of goes into another issue with this game lacking the intrinsic value of exploring when the game just tells you where the rewards are in any given situation. Though it's not like the rewards amount to much anyway here. The special stages exist, I guess. These are easily the most brainless special stages in the series. Even without understanding how they work, a lot of the stages are insanely easy and require little more than the bare minimum of thought to beat. Historically, I have always thought of special stages as an antithesis to Sonic design, mostly functioning as a time waster to acquire something that could have just been hidden in the stage or rewarded for good play. It doesn't help that most of the special stages are typically not fun to play either. The half-pipe in particular has always been the fucking bane of my existence in these games. That's not to say that there aren't good special stages. Sonic CD and Manias are easily among the most fun and engaging of the lot, but I still find it an unnecessary thing in general. The stages and Superstars are just time wasters really, not providing much of a challenge outside of Stage 5, which can go eat a dick. Then we have the bonus stages. It's just the Sonic 1 special stages, but the rewards are these medals. I'll touch more on that shortly. These are at least somewhat more interesting than the original Sonic 1 stages, as they introduce concepts that make them feel more engaging design-wise, like switches to change which blocks are where or build new areas of the stage. But at the end of the day, these are kind of pointless when compared to the Sonic 3 and Knuckles bonus stages. Those at least gave you things like special shields, which aren't in Superstars, by the way, or more lives, but here it's just medals and points for the score. Alright, I can't tiptoe around this shit anymore. Let's talk about the score, and how it is completely worthless in this game. You see, in every single other classic Sonic game, the score has always been an integral part of its mechanics. Getting enough points gave you more lives, more chances to survive mistakes that you make in the future. Doing special and bonus stages well would grant you continues as well to coincide with that. It was beneficial to the player to do these things because they would serve as a boon for late game survival. I 1cc'd Sonic 3 and Knuckles in the process of getting footage for this video, which was aided by me consistently utilizing the bonus stages to get a fuck ton of lives. By the end of my run, I had well over 30 lives, from a combination of skill and use of the bonus stages available. The problem with Superstars is a fundamental problem with a lot of modern titles, and I know it'll be an unpopular opinion, but infinite lives are stupid. Now, I'm sure a lot of people will be reeling back at me saying this, and even to some extent, I don't fully agree with myself either. But in the case of this game, it is a particularly stupid choice. In some games, I can understand why unlimited lives are a thing. A game like Soulless comes to mind when I think about it, which is so ball-bustingly challenging that for it to have a life system would be a grating detriment, especially given its lack of a score system anyway. But in Superstars, it just doesn't make sense for two reasons. The first is that Sonic has literally always had a balanced system around using score to get more lives, like I explained earlier. So it's never truly that difficult to acquire more lives early on in the game. Even then, Sonic has always had life boxes that the player would search for in prior titles. Another thing yet cast away, reducing exploration even further in this title. But really, it's the second reason that makes infinite lives even more redundant. This game has a fucking hub world. If you were to game over at a boss fight, you can literally just reselect the level by walking to it on the hub world, or better yet, selecting it in the fucking menu. Honestly, I'd prefer this method because At least having to do the level from the start again gives me some breathing room instead of just having me hit my fucking head against a wall against some of the worst boss fights in this godforsaken game. And let me make something clear here. I'm not a big score person. One of the reasons why I find myself not enjoying games like Bayonetta is because the game loves to just shove my results in my goddamn face every couple of minutes, which for me gets really irritating. I typically don't like scores because they make me feel inadequate, which I know is petty, but I don't play video games to be treated like I'm writing an essay for my American history class. It's like the game constantly screaming "skill issue" into my ears like my friends do when I play games in general. It just demotivates me even if the game has really interesting mechanics that I find enjoyable. But removing a score system like Sonic's, that has worked since 1991 and was thoroughly improved upon by 1994, that it has been consistently used up to Mania via cutting lives, but still keeping the score numbers around, just makes them fucking pointless. What is the score supposed to be now? Bragging rights? At least in Bayonetta, the score contributes directly to the halos that you use to acquire more moves and items, giving more or less dependent on your rank. There is nothing like that here. Only the medals, which the score isn't a factor of. It literally removes two intrinsic values of classic Sonic: exploring the stage to find hidden goodies, and performing well to get higher scores to get more lives. With infinite lives, the player will just become complacent. Why learn how these stages even work? Why engage with level mechanics when I can just be Tails and fly over half the stage, or use Bullet to avoid a minute's worth of level design, or lack thereof? Why try avoiding stage hazards or enemies when I'll just be able to try over and over and over again with zero consequence? It doesn't inspire self-improvement or motivate the player to be better. It also just feels like they did this so that they can make the level design and bosses incredibly shitty, but have the excuse that, oh, there's infinite lives, so it doesn't matter, which in reality just drains out all of the fun I could have here. They don't feel the need to focus on actually balancing the game or making boss fights less unbearable because, with infinite lives, they just expect the player to accept every piece of bullshit that comes their way with open arms because at least they have infinite attempts. It sucks. There's no other way of putting it other than that it sucks. There is no reason for the game to be this way. I don't even want to hazard talking about the fruit stages or character-specific ones, if I'm being honest here. The fruit stages are fundamentally about as pointless as it gets for this game. Literally nothing more than coin collection stages to grind out medals, and getting a completely pointless score that means nothing. Character-specific stages are at least additional levels in general, but they're usually among the least fun to experience of the entire bunch. Sonic's is just a chase with Fang the Sniper, which is really just aping off the Metal Sonic boss fight from Sonic CD, which we've seen in both Generations and Mania, as well as aspects of the Heavy Gunner fight from Mania as well. Amy's... look, I don't even know what to say about it. It's just a stage with a bunch of fruit for some reason. I don't even know why there's fruit, it's just there. And then, at the end, there's a section where Amy carries newcomer Trip, requiring you to be very cautious with platforming. The Knuckles stage in Golden Capital is just downright forgettable, as in, I cannot actually remember much about it at all, other than the fact that in the additional mode that I'll go into later, it is designed by a goddamn psychopath. And the Tail stage just is. Apparently you can do it and skip Act 1 of its particular zone, which is nice, I guess, but I doubt that was the intended way to progress. None of these felt particularly entertaining or worth the time going through. And if you want my take, you should honestly just skip them. It's not like it means anything more than getting those medals. The medals are basically an in-game currency for robot building. Essentially, you can make your own Metal Sonic, Metal Tails, etc. A neat concept on paper, but doesn't really serve much of a purpose unless you plan on engaging with this game's battle mode, which I didn't. It's such a grind anyway, because parts cost such an insane amount that if you even want your robot to look cool, you'll have to spend so much time doing bonus and special stages just to get more medals. Not to say there isn't a payoff to this. The boss fight in Cyber Station Zone uses your created robot as the boss, but again, much like the Fang Chase in Sonic's character level, it's aping off the goddamn Metal Sonic boss fight again. Something that, at this point, we have seen 4 separate times. And it even tries ripping off the Sonic 3 semi-final boss for its second phase. Is there nothing this game can actually try to do differently to stand out in a way that doesn't come off as either atrocious or dull? The level designs are all bland, the boss fights are all terrible, music falls short too, and even just as a traditional goddamn video game, it seems like all Sonic Superstars can do is fall short at every step of the way. It wastes your time, doesn't try to engage you with well thought out mechanics, and overstays its welcome. I guess I shouldn't have been surprised, given the track record of both of the teams that worked on this game. Sonic Team speaks for itself, so let's talk about Arzest instead. Arzest is one of the worst game developers in the industry. Every game they've developed has either been excessively middling or just downright terrible, to the point of receiving immense infamy like in the last console title they developed right before this one, Balan Wonderworld. It seems like Arzest can't seem to understand fundamental aspects of game design. Or at least, that's what I'm surmising here, because I'm not going to fucking torture myself by playing any more of their games after this dumpster fire experience. It is hilariously shocking to know that Arzest was founded by former Sonic artist Naoto Oshima, who is the director of Sonic CD, which is considered by some to be Sonic's most artful game. It's funny to think how such an artist could come to be involved with such mediocre displays that I would hazard to even try to call art. Though, maybe excessive mediocrity is an art form in of itself. Who can really say? I don't really like Sonic CD, but after having to play Superstars 4 times before the release of this video, I at least have to find myself giving it some respect, because at least CD didn't waste my fucking time nearly as much as this shit. How someone can fall so goddamn far and so goddamn hard is a question I'm not even going to posit here. And to make it all worse, every issue with this game, every minute problem, all of it, is made 10 times worse in Trips mode. While Newcomer Trip is a fine addition to the roster herself, having the same double jump as Amy, as well as being able to stick her spines into surfaces to climb around, the levels she is forced to engage with are inexcusably awful. In the game's attempt to replicate playing as Knuckles in Sonic 3, which included level areas not seen in Sonic or Tails' runs and was more challenging overall, they instead decided to shit all over the already not great level design here. Arzest just shits out a bajillion egg robos and spikes all over the fucking place and calls it a day. The Knuckles character stage is reused and feels designed like fucking Metropolis Zone from Sonic 2, with slicers in areas you can't realistically react to, bumpers that shoot you into crushing blocks, or enemies outside of the camera's view. On that note, all of the previously exclusive character levels are now unskippable, resulting in some worlds now having 3 acts! in a game with 12 zones that is already unnecessarily long as it stands. This is only made semi-bearable by Trip just flat out having infinite flight as long as she's in her super form. So hey, if you just want to not engage with a level, just have enough rings to fly over it. Jesus Christ, what were they smoking? You want to know something funny though? Trip mode actually requires you to use the emerald powers. Something the game has never forced you to do for level traversal before. And to make it even funnier, if you're in her super form, yeah, it's a dragon, you'll be stuck at some of these blockades like in Pinball Carnival until she manually detransforms from losing rings. Now, I posted a video a while back when I first encountered this and was told I could turn off the super form, which is true for every other character in the game. But, for whatever reason, no matter how many times I tried to do so with Trip, it just would not work. Couldn't tell you why. I did the exact same inputs, but nada. Just would not happen. Then there's the bosses. If you thought my earlier dissertation about how the boss's desire to waste your time wasn't harsh enough, welcome to the extended version. Fights that were already absurdly lengthy are now even longer. And of course, with ramped up difficulty to boot. Of course, it isn't all bad. If you manage to have your super form for the fight, you can just stand on the boss and wait what feels like a full half minute for them to die. I'm not joking either. I'm going to play unedited footage of the Pinball Carnival Act 2 boss and show you how long it took for the fight to end, despite me being in my super form and being right on top of the boss for 95% of the fight. Isn't that just fucking absurd? But that's enough beating around the bush. Let's get to the biggest sin committed by Trip Mode. Making me hate Fang the Sniper. Many people were excited when it was announced that Fang would be returning. After Mighty and Ray returned in Mania Plus in 2018, I'm sure a lot of Sonic fans were itching to see characters like Fang, Bean the Dynamite, and Bark the Polar Bear come back in some sort of capacity. Superstars grants this wish, but with that, another finger on the monkey's paw curls. In the main story mode, Fang appears a total of 2 fucking times. The one time for Sonic's character stage early in Speed Jungle, and then the second as the boss of Golden Capital Act 2. There's no real fanfare for any of this. Fang kinda just comes and goes as quickly as he's shown off. The intro cutscene would trick you into thinking otherwise, but as far as the main story goes, he's not really a factor. But in Trip Mode, while he remains narratively irrelevant since the Egg Robos are the true antagonists, Fang does take a particularly special position, being the final boss. Or rather, the worst classic Sonic boss fight in the history of the fucking series! Okay. To give some background up to this point, the player will have just gone through Egg Fortress Act 1, which is a terrible level that has you loop the same 4 to 5 gimmicks what feels like 3 times. Platforms being formed underneath you, a spinning platform that takes too long, slow anti-gravity segments, parts where the level forms around you, and brief middle sections. Once you reach the end of the level, Act 2 begins. Its gimmick is just being Act 1, but you play the level in reverse. Theoretically, this is a cool concept. But, because this is Arzest we're talking about, it's done in the worst way possible, while you play the same 4 to 5 gimmicks again, but just in reverse. It is only at the end of that miserable slog experience that you will reach Fang. A fight that isn't just frustrating, agonizingly bullshit, and excessively long, but also straight up boring. I could run here. I could. But it doesn't make much of a difference other than doing what I claim this game tries to create. An illusion of speed. So, instead I stand, jumping in place over these jump rope missiles that do nothing but waste my time, as I hope and pray we can get back to the part where I can damage Fang. Now, once I manage to land a hit, either by getting lucky and hitting the fucker before he spawns his instant death beams, or I have to dodge them, we go right back to the missiles. Then after that, I have to be able to make a perfect jump into Fang when he does this illusionary attack. I say perfectly because missing usually guarantees death by falling into the pit that Fang makes with this attack. Then, after the hit, we're back to the missiles. This is a cycle you have to do 3 times total for 6 total hits, and that's if you don't screw up. And eventually, Fang starts surrounding himself with like 7 of the beams. Trying to hit him normally without using emerald powers is a strat of boredom, as you have to slowly inch your way around the death beam. If you're asking why I didn't use the emerald powers for most of my runs at this boss, that'll be answered shortly, I assure you. Once the player finally manages to beat him, he crashes down, and then a giant Fang mech rises up. Now, multi-phase boss fights are no stranger to this game. In fact, they're damn near everywhere in the second half. But this one in particular is the worst in the game. Having to quickly rush to the backside of the mech to hit bombs or little motorcycle badnik things, then having to not get caught by nets lest suffer an instant death that sends you back to the start of Phase 1, all the while still not being interesting or fun in any sense of the word. Then, after you successfully hit him 7 times, he does an unexpected face slam attack that you barely have time to register and move out of the center. And even then, sometimes it's inconsistent, and the attack will destroy even the platforms on the side. No idea why the fuck that happens. This is why I saved my emerald powers, because I thought I wouldn't be able to use them if I used them in the first phase. But, as it turns out, I was wrong! Yes, you can use the emerald powers in both phases, which I only figured out by watching a fucking tutorial for the fight on YouTube after hours of frustration. The game doesn't make it remotely fucking clear that the powers reset between phases. There's no fucking indicator that that happened, and it's so fucking bullshit. The second phase winds up requiring a total of 9 hits, meaning this boss requires 15 fucking hits total to beat. Not even the 3D entries get that egregiously long with their boss fights. So ultimately, what you wind up left with is a mode that is designed like Mega Man X6, the worst Sonic boss fight in the entirety of the classic series, and little else. This is ultimately followed up by the final story mode, which is just a supersonic fight against a fucking dragon that is literally only slightly hinted at once in this entire game, outside of Trip's super form. This is less suffocating as the Fang fight, but is still a continuation of the game's time waster agenda. I do not understand why a supersonic stage has to have instant death mechanics, or why this has to go on longer than Doomsday Zone and Egg Reverie. Like, look, Egg Reverie sucked, but you know, at least that was like, short, right? This is just overcompensating to the point of becoming exhausting. And that, my friends, is what Sonic Superstars is. Exhausting. We are left with a Sonic game devoid of life and originality. And to quote my review for the game on Backloggd, which is what inspired this video, Sonic Superstars is what happens when you make a mass-produced Sonic game. Gentrified Sonic the Hedgehog. I was deeply upset after I finished Superstars for the first time. I mean, how could I not be? This has been the platforming franchise for me since I was a toddler. I grew up with the blue dude always being there. Yeah, sure, he would flounder at points, release some big stinkers, but he always got back up, tried to put on a good showing. But with the loss of the Mania team going to work on their next game, Penny's Big Breakaway, which is looking to be fantastic by the way, and the Sonic Frontiers DLC not being well received at all, I also think it's dog shit personally. Knuckles controls like shit. It was up to Superstars to be the best it could be, and it just isn't. It's just another Arzest asswipe. Not all hope is lost, however. While Sonic may be on a major decline yet again, another franchise released a title only a few days after Superstars' release. A franchise with a long, storied rivalry with the Blue Blur. And once more, comes out to dominating in every conceivable way. It's Super fucking Mario. Super Mario Wonder released on October 20th to high acclaim, and it's not really surprising to see why. Funnily enough though, this was the game my friends and I had the most amount of debates on in regards to the Soul argument. My friend Alan, go watch his video on the definitive version of Persona 3 by the way, it's really good, semi-jokingly posited multiple times before Wonder's release that it was an artificial Soul game. A game with a zoomer aesthetic art style to appeal to a wider audience. Of course, I disagreed, and we had this little debate on what artificial soul even means, or what soul is to a video game. If it needs to be said, Wonder is absolutely not artificial. This game is 100% authentic soul. And this comes from outside of the game's designs. The creators of Wonder were given ample time to make the game how they wanted it to be. A novel fucking concept in this day and age in regards to game development. It allowed them to breathe fresh new life into 2D Mario, which, after the past decade, had kind of dwindled into an overly safe and boring routine. For the sake of brevity, I'm not going to go into as intensive detail on Mario Wonder, since it's not the primary focus of this video. And I think, if you haven't played Wonder yet, you're doing yourself a disservice. So if you haven't, go play it first, and then come back after you're done. This section is more here to serve as a compare and contrast piece, to show how, in the most basic of ways, Super Mario Wonder absolutely curbstomps Sonic Superstars, and it isn't a contest. Hey look, I did it, Ma! I name-dropped the thumbnail! Levels in Wonder are relatively brisk, introducing an idea at the start while the player is in a safe environment, and then goes on to expand on the idea through usage of the Wonder Seed. Now these are very fun, as they can either make the concepts introduced larger than life, or alternatively, turn them on their head completely and have you engage with the game in a way you wouldn't have done before. Unlike Superstars that drags out its gimmicks to a point of having 2 levels centered around pinball, Wonder will introduce a gimmick, and if they think they can improve upon it, they'll make a different level rather than extending the current one. This allows you to engage with the introduced ideas at your own pace, which is exceedingly faster than Superstars ever tries to be. Boss fights are the typical affair. Quick, simple, and efficient. The first boss of this game takes maybe 20 seconds max, compared to the minute-long affair Superstars shoves down the player's throat. Wonder does these bosses quickly, all while still having interesting mechanics for the player to have to adapt to. The power-ups are all incredibly fun to utilize, and all focus on giving the player choice in regards to level progression. Do you choose to brute force as the elephant, or avoid enemies altogether and blaze through underground with the drill? There's also a variety of breakup stages to keep things from getting monotonous, and unlike the bonus and fruit stages in Superstars, these are actually helpful for progression by giving you alternative ways to get Wonder Seeds, speeding up your progress in the world. The music is absolutely lovely, and while not the most memorable stuff you'll hear in a video game, it's at least more pleasant than 75% of the Superstars soundtrack. And of course, the game is visually gorgeous, with each level having a distinctive style, and not purely relying on typical tropes the series has presented. Or sometimes it turns those tropes on their head. Sure, there may be a desert level, but there's also a swamp that's filled with magma. All of these things combine into an experience that left me so satisfied that I've been actively working to 100% it. I've played all the stages, I've gotten all the purple 10 coins, which, hey, help with getting more lives, how about that? Touched the top of every flagpole, and even played both of the secret final stages. A game that gets me to do that is one that has a vast soul that yearns to be explored. And hey, it even managed to gain Alan's respect on its own. So, as the holiday season continues to get nearer and nearer, and the kiddies all ask for a new game, consider getting them Super Mario Wonder this year. It's fun for the whole family. There's always going to be something to get out of it. With that, I want to conclude this video with a couple of statements. I didn't review the multiplayer because I didn't play the multiplayer of either game. From what I've heard though, Sonic Superstars' multiplayer is somehow way worse of an experience than the main game, if it can be believed. If I haven't stated it enough in this video, I love Sonic the Hedgehog. This channel was literally formed out of a love for Sonic the Hedgehog. I went by Sonica Gamma for like 4 to 5 years here, and made really silly, goofy Sonic sprite animations as a preteen. Sonic has always inspired me to create, to make things that I enjoy on an inherent personal level. As I've grown into adulthood, Sonic still stands as my rock in regards to creativity. And I'm just really tired of seeing this franchise that I love rest on its laurels time and time again to sink back into mediocrity. But if this is how Sonic, classic Sonic in particular, is going to be treated from now on, with this level of hollowness and utterly unpleasant design choices, then I firmly believe it should have died after Mania. There's a quote I think about rather often. It's from Fallout New Vegas, my favorite video game of all time. During the ending for Mr. House, one of the companions, Cass, says it in regards to how backward she sees his regime. It's a reference to The Great Gatsby, a book about a man who has everything and yet nothing at the same time. In a similar sense, Sonic has both immense potential and yet shows no real progress as a series. It feels fitting to me that a line from my favorite video game would define the current situation of the franchise that has most impacted who I am.
We were going full speed ahead, but facing backwards the whole time.
So nasty that it's probably somewhat of a travesty having me. Then he told the people, you can call me your majesty. Keep your battery charged, you know it won't stick, yo. And it's not his fault you kick slow. Should've let your trick hold your sick glow. Plus nobody couldn't do nothing once he let the brick go. And you know I know that's a bunch of snow. The beat is so butter. Peep the slow cutter as he utter the calm flow. Don't talk about my mom, yo. Sometimes he rhyme quick, sometimes he rhyme slow, or vice versa. Whip up a slice of nice verse pie, hit it on the first try, villain. The worst guy, spot hot tracks like spot a pair of fat asses. Shots of the scotch from out the square shot glasses. And he won't stop till he got the masses. And show them what they know now through flows of hot molasses. Do it like the robot to headspin to boogaloo. Took a few minutes to convince the average boogaboo. It's ugly, like look at you, it's a damn shame. Just remember all caps when you spell the man name.
Green just such a great passer.
Beal just picked up his third foul. And now Green runs over Nurkic, and he'll be called for the foul, and they're going to take a look at this. See Jason Goebel indicating they will go to the monitor here. Nurkic is down in a heap. Green just plows right over Nurkic. And we'll see if there's anything unnecessary added to it. Oh, man.
Well, that's going to be a flagrant.
Yep.
Can't change the events that happen, but we can control what happens moving forward, and that's where we are. And myself...